Welcome to episode 76 of Rubbish Talk with me, Alasdair.
And me, Jane Bond.
I had to think about that there, Jane, didn't we?
I know. Well, we've been pulled up on our grammatical
We've been corrected.
correctness.
Yep. So thanks for John Crawford, an avid listener of the podcast that pulled us up for our incorrect introductions in terms of grammar. But in our defence, if any of you listen to the rest is politics, they also introduce themselves as myself, Alasdair Meldrum, or myself, Rory Stewart, or whatever they are. So that's our defence, and we're sticking to it. But we thought we'd make a change, especially for you, John. So what news, Jane?
Oh, another fire at a waste site.
Dear.
This time, S. Norton's at Glasgow East. Again, that's fire and rescue service were out on the evening of the 10th of September. 6 appliances and a high-reach vehicle and additional supports. There's quite a lot of vehicles were out, but apparently it was attended promptly. Incident was under control and no one was injured. And we haven't had any information on what caused the fire, but it just goes to show how important it is to make sure everything's managed such that the fires don't start in the first place, or the waste isn't there to start the fire.
I was at a safety meeting the other day, a switch safety meeting, and we started talking about fires, and the information is there's four refuse collection vehicles every day going on fire in the UK, and the fire service don't actually have a system for what they do with them when they do go on fire, whether they tip them out the roadside or whether they take them to an area or whatever. And that's made even more complicated that often these refuse vehicles are no longer diesel trucks. They're sometimes sitting with a row of batteries themselves in the roof, or they're a hydrogen vehicle, all that sort of stuff. So it's a big problem. You know, it's a big problem area that the fire service don't know how to deal with them consistently. And it's an even bigger problem that all these batteries, all these waste electrical and electronic equipment is getting into the waste stream and causing these. And to me, and I keep ranting about this, complaining about this, we need to go back upstream to the producers and get them to take a bit of responsibility to the products they're putting in the market.
Absolutely.
We can't keep having this number of fires.
Yeah, it just seems to be happening over and over again, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. Well, some positive news for the set. Well, positive news, if you like, a new waste energy plant been opened. So 500 million site was designed and built by Canadaver. Innovate, I can't say that properly. Expected to process 410,000 tonnes of waste each year, generating 49 megawatts of energy. And it started taking its first waste. It's operated by a company called Infinium, and it's just recently opened, and it handles most of the waste from Leeds City Council. So
yeah, that's a fair amount of waste.
Maybe some of the waste from Scotland when the landfill ban comes in at the end of the year, but
Who's trekking south?
You never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
So I've got another one here. We always think of the Dutch being nice and clean and sorting out their rubbish, but apparently the Dutch waste tax hikes risk encouraging unnecessary waste tourism. So they're actually putting some tax rises on their waste in the Netherlands. And they're looking at raising up to 567 million euros. But obviously the Dutch waste sector is not too happy about this. So it looks like they're going to be exporting quite a lot of waste. So we'll have to see what happens with that one.
It's the same sort of principle about making a higher landfill tax rate in Scotland and England. If you make the price differential too much, then the waste will travel.
Yeah, he says it'll soon be cheaper to take your waste abroad. There we go.
So there's an interesting one from John Lewis. So John Lewis Partnership, they have added another £29 million to their cost to cope with extended producer responsibility. So it's certainly having an impact in these organisations in terms of thinking about the costs they're having to pay to go into extended producer responsibility. But the old grumpy old man in me says about time they started paying the right contribution for all the waste to put onto the sector. So if other retailers are having similar pain, then I think that's probably quite a good thing.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts?
No, I would say so because they've got to take a bit more responsibility for this waste they keep putting out in the market. So let's see what happens with that one, and see if the next week there's something about Sainsbury's or other.
But I suppose the downside, if they're having to put 34 million against their profits, what's going to happen? Well, they're just going to charge us more, so we're going to pay in the end.
Well,
if we're being really cynical, but
maybe
it might get them to try and improve the amount of packaging they put on the system,
or reduce the amount of packaging. So the other one I've got here is Plastic Overshoot Day, talking about packagings. This is a symbolic date when the plastic waste the world generates surpasses its capacity to manage it. So all plastic waste produced for the final 170 days of the year will not be properly managed. I don't quite know what that means. It doesn't really explain it, but Earth Action. I suppose they're trying to do the same of, just what's the other overshoot day that we have? Energy Overshoot Day or something. I can't remember what it is now. So it's saying that on average there's 28 kilograms of plastic waste per person will be generated globally this year, which is a 9.7% increase since 2021. So we're not actually reducing our plastics, are we? We're increasing it significantly.
I would think for people in 28 kilograms is probably low, because your bin, if you think of your bin will be 6 or 7 kilos of plastic if you put your mixed bin out.
Well, yeah.
That goes out a good few times a year. So I would think the average in the UK will probably way above 20 kilograms. And I'm actually surprised that we've lasted till September before we reach this overcapacity thing.
Yeah, it does say packaging accounted for 33% of plastic production, followed by textiles at 17%. So, it's no surprise really that packaging accounts for the majority of it. Well, most of it compared to everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there was one spotted. I spotted one. It was actually in the Guardian, about thousands of tons of toxic landfill liquid added to sewage and then spread on farms, which is ever so slightly misleading as a heading, but that doesn't get in the way of a good story. So what this is about is, so a lot of landfill leachate, if they've not got a treatment plant at the landfill site, they will transfer it to large sewage works, and it'll be treated through the sewage works, and then the sludge from the sewage works will then be treated, and it's often applied to land as a fertiliser. So it's half true, but not totally true. Now there is, I think for a long time, that there's probably people in the industry are actually wondering if applying sewage sludge to land with microplastics and various things that it might contain is possibly not the best solution for sewage sludges, but it does have good nutritional value and so on, and it is used as a replacement fertilizer. So I think this sort of study, the report, it was mainly looking at some of these forever chemicals, the PFAs that will be in the leachate, but these PFAs are also probably in the sewage as well.
Well,
so it's not just the leachate that's causing the problem. And really, if you need to remove these things, we need to remove them upstream. So it was actually quite an interesting article, but I think it's only maybe given a bit of the picture. And if we don't want the sewage sludge to go to land, what we're going to do with it, and who's going to pay the treatment cost? We produce a hell of a lot of sewage sludge every year. Maybe there's a rubbish talk for us, Jane.
How to reduce the amount of sewage sludge
disposal? Sewage sludge disposal. It's not so long ago. When was the ban? It must have been about 1998. The ban of dumping sewage sludge at sea.
Yeah.
So in Glasgow, the boat used to pull up in the Clyde. It used to fill up with the sewage sludge. It used to run down the Clyde, open the bottom of the boat, and it would chuck in the sea. And that only stopped fairly recently. And I'm guessing some listeners can listen in and tell us, but I'm guessing about 1998, 97, 98 would be the ban on sewage sludge going to sea.
I mean, it's like with anything. We talk about waste. It's got to go somewhere, hasn't it? We're not going to never produce any waste. It just keeps coming. And the same with sewage sludge. I mean, you can't stop sewage sludge being produced. It's just how we deal with it and how we treat it. Got to go somewhere.
Yeah. But I think the real concern, and there's probably valid concerns, is there's microplastics in there, there's medicines in there, there's all sorts of stuff, and we're applying that to land,
Well, yeah, for
is
sewage
that
sludge
then
and
just
leachate,
getting back in the food chain?
Yeah.
But that probably leads us into this week's topic, Jane, that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about disposal, and in effect, we're going to talk about landfill. So imagine that. Did you think we'd planned that? Imagine us getting
This is always
a news item that links together.
I know.
Professionals.
Well done.
So let's go into disposal. So we're on to the last section of the waste hierarchy. So up till now, we've covered reduce, we've covered reuse, we've covered recycle, and recently we covered recover. And now we're going to talk all about disposal. So myself and Jane, we thought this was going to be the easy one because we both, our backgrounds in waste management started way back in the distant time in landfill.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's very much viewed as the last resort in terms of waste hierarchy. But I suppose when you think about it, it's maybe not as last resort as burning it all and chucking it up in the air as in recovery. So what we'll do is we'll go through a bit of the history of landfill, particularly in the UK, current use for landfill, because it has still got a requirement, talk about some of the environmental impacts, regulations, and what might be in the future, things like landfill mining, which may or not happen in the future. So what was your first recollection of landfill, Jane?
Oh, I tell you what, my landfill experience started in the late 1980s. And it was actually interesting because everything was landfill. That's what it did. There was very, very, there might have been, I think, because I used to work for Shropshire County Council. That was my first foray into landfill sites. So, we owned our own landfill sites at a council. Everything was landfill. And I suppose my first recollections were going out, putting in groundwater monitoring points and gas monitoring points and getting involved in lining, because I actually think Shropshire was quite progressive in those days because we did have a lot of lining. We were looking at geosynthetic lining, whereas a lot of I think that's when it first started coming in, bentonite and rich sand. And even sites that in the Midlands, there was one site that actually lined it with asphalt, lined their site with asphalt. So, I think things were happening. I think we'd kind of started to realise that perhaps we couldn't just dilute and disperse or dilute and pollute like they used to be. You used to put all your landfill, all your waste, all your rubbish into one big hole. And, if you were next to a big river or if you were next to the sea, that was perfect. That was perfect dilution. But probably, as things went on, people realised that perhaps not just all the water coming into the site and the leachate, that's what they call the contaminated water. So your rainwater comes in, it goes and, amongst all the waste, and it dissolves all the contaminants and all the yucky stuff, and then comes out as a horrible black liquid at the end, which realistically you do not want to put in your surface water or with your fish or anything like that. So that, I suppose that was, but also the other big thing was gas, landfill gas. And, it was one of the sites, and that was probably one of the main reasons as well, there was a bungalow blew up, wasn't it, Alasdair? You remember there was a bungalow blew up not far off from a landfill site.
Famous bungalow.
Yes, and landfill gas had come from the landfill site, got into the bungalow, got into an enclosed space, and a spark, and up went the bungalow. And I think that's when they realised that there was issues with landfill gas as well, and there could be a potential issue there. So, that was the sort of start, really. And I think we started to realise possibly that landfill wasn't such a good thing after all, because once it's in there, it's gone. Not a lot you can do about it.
I suppose taking a step back to the very original, landfill was used as a, you took your waste out of the town and you took it to an old quarry, you restored a quarry, or you filled a low point in land and so on. And I think most local authorities around the country still have what we call legacy sites where relatively small quantities of waste were put into landfill. And if you think back to the sort of 1950s, 1960s, a lot of waste would have been burnt in household coal fire. So quite often at that stage, a lot of the waste was actually just ash. It wasn't the same sort of waste as we've got now. Over time, we realised we needed to line sites, we needed to collect that leachate, collect that contaminated liquid, and also manage the landfill gas from it. I think probably when I started in the industry, and I'm trying to remember actually, the early 1990s, UK was viewed very much as a leader in landfill technology. Had lots of research going on into, how leachate's formed, how it's treated, landfill gas. London Brick at the time was capturing the landfill gas and turning it into electricity, and that's going back, 20 odd years ago we were doing that. As a technology, it was quite good. But obviously at the same time, they were well run sites, but they were also pretty poorly managed sites. And there's probably sites still around the country still causing legacy issues in terms of contamination of groundwater and surface water. And that is one of the big issues, and the big move away from landfill is that you put waste into a landfill and it continues to degrade and produce methane, produce leachate for a long, long time. So you're talking about, anything up to 60 to 100 years of aftercare life for these sites to manage them. And that's one of the reasons we have shifted away from landfill.
Yeah. I think the same with the landfill gas as well. I've just looked it up. 1986, Loscoe. That was the landfill gas explosion.
I was going to say that was due to a change in air pressure.
Yeah, it was.
So gas will move by the easiest route, in the same way gas from the North Sea comes into your houses just by the pressure of the gas from the North Sea. The change in air pressure actually pushed the landfill gas out into that bungalows. And air pressure change. Somebody actually posted that up on LinkedIn recently when there was a big storm coming in to make sure you check the landfill sites are working properly when there's big low pressure areas coming in.
Yeah, I think the thing with it is as well is it's I find it quite difficult because you actually do get carbon dioxide and methane. I mean, the main thing landfill gas is methane and carbon dioxide, and it comes in different concentrations depending on whether there's been any air ingress or whatever. But you can actually get relatively high levels of carbon dioxide naturally and methane naturally. So it's just trying to make sure that you're not trying to mitigate against something that's actually natural in the first place, which is why lots of monitoring to be taken out around landfill sites.
Yeah. So I suppose from the operational side, I was going to say the pleasure of running landfill sites for 5 years, but it was, I'm not saying it was always a pleasure, because you never had ideal weather conditions. There was always a problem weather for landfills. So if you had lots and lots of wind, the problem was you would be tipping out 30-ton trucks of waste onto the top of the ground. The wind would take it, and particularly before with the plastic bag tax, all these plastic bags used to fill up with air and then disappear off your site, and you spend the next 5 days picking them up. If you had nice calm weather in the winter, a nice frosty morning, that was perfect weather for the odour from your landfill site, which was generally, Jane mentioned the landfill gas. One of the things in the landfill gas is trace components, trace gases, and it's actually the gases that are actually really odorous rather than the methane and the carbon dioxide has no odour. So if you had a nice dry morning, you used to get lots and lots of odour complaints. Obviously it was raining lots, you struggled to get the vehicles in and out the site, and you'd carry mud out onto the road and all sorts of things. So I'm fairly convinced there's not actually an ideal weather condition for running landfill sites. If you had nice, hot and dry in the summer, you had lots of dust problems. You used to get a dust bowser in or some sort of suppression, and then you'd probably run out of water because it had been sunny for 3 days in Scotland, and then sometimes towards the end of the season you'd probably have a fly problem as well. So generally, if you're running a landfill site, you always had some sort of environmental impact to try and deal with, as long as all your other issues. So
I suppose we're not selling it to anybody there, are we, Alasdair, really? If it's not. I mean, I suppose the real main thing with landfill is when they started putting the landfill tax on, wasn't it? They started increasing the cost significantly for how much a ton of waste would cost going into a landfill, even before you've paid the actual operator for tipping it. So you got your landfill tax. I mean, at the moment, I don't know, the landfill tax started about £2 or something like that, and now it's up at
£5,
£5?
I think, £5.
£5. Well,
It's either 5 or 7. I can never remember if it was 5 or 7. I think it's 5. So I'm sure somebody will correct us if it's wrong.
Sure, well,
and that was
really, and trying to move that waste away from being dumped into a big hole in the ground, basically.
in terms of the tax, it has been effective because we were saying there, late 1990s, 95% of what UK produced went to landfill. Now we're probably less than, I think it's about 45-50% goes to landfill.
Yeah.
So as a tax, it's been effective, and that's driven investment in recycling and infrastructure and so on. But what it's also allowed is driven that investment in the waste energy plants that can match that price, if you like. But what is done quite considerably is fueled a lot of waste crime. If it's costing you £126 a tonne in terms of tax to dispose of waste, then there's an opportunity for the criminal element to get involved. And that's the real driver to the waste crime that's going on in the UK. And I actually don't know what the answer to that is, because the tax has been effective, but on the other hand, if it's just fueled this whole thing of waste crime, then that problem's only going to get worse, unless there's really, really tight regulations around it.
Yeah, I suppose the problem we've had is we've moved from landfill. We've always had landfill in the past, and like you were saying there was a lot of research went on about what was the best way of managing it, and we had lots of land as well, whereas a lot of places in Europe didn't. They were starting from energy from waste or incineration or whatever right from the very beginning. So there was a lot of regulations and stuff put on landfill, because it was only really the UK that actually were pioneering or whatever in landfill, because Europe wanted to move to energy from waste, really. My taking of that in the past.
Yeah, no, I suppose it takes me back a little bit to the discussions, Jane, that were going on then. Europe very much viewed landfill as trying to. So at that time, Britain had what we called was it stabilised bioreactors? We called them. So the logic in the UK was you engineer the site, so you line the site with clay and artificial membranes, and that keeps all the leachate in and all the landfill gas in, and then you put in treatment systems for the leachate and gas systems for the gas. And then what you're trying to do is you're actually trying to get the waste to break down as quickly as possible, so that once the waste is broken down, there's nothing else to degrade, and therefore, eventually the pollution from the site would disappear. So that was the UK thinking at the time. The European thinking was very much about trying to entomb the waste, if you like. So it was trying to make sure it was entombed forever, and they would never have a chance to leak out. So I suppose the UK was maybe taking a bit more of a pragmatic approach, because we had all these quarries needing restored, and we were trying to speed up that degradation, if you like. So there's a big change in, when was the Landfill Directive came out, Jane? I should know this off the top of my head, but so that changed to what we had to do in the UK was we actually had to license either an inert site, which is brick, concrete, rubble and so on, or a non-hazardous site, or a hazardous site, and we weren't allowed to mix, and again in the UK, what we did was we mixed hazardous waste with non-hazardous waste on the same sort of basis that the activity in the landfill would neutralise all that hazardous waste. And that went on for a long time in the UK. So now we're in a situation where, for example, in Scotland, there are actually no hazardous waste sites. So any hazardous waste produced in Scotland, it needs to go south of the border. It has to go south of the border, and all we have is inert sites and non-hazardous sites.
Yeah, just look. The Landfill Directive was 1999 that came in, and actually, like you say, identified what lining systems we needed to put in the landfill site, which was quite it was quite good at that time, but it was just trying to educate a lot of people on the fact that you can't just dump it in a hole anymore. And the lining systems are expensive. They were expensive, weren't they? I mean, you were putting a metre of clay in as a minimum, or your plastic liners, which had to be a certain thickness and all this sort of stuff. And, so it was actually increasing the cost and increasing I suppose, the science and the engineering around it all, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that at that time, what happened was there was a lot of sites not operating to the right standard, and they had the choice. They had the choice. They either, if they wanted to keep operating, they had to comply with the regulations, or they had to leave the business, if you like. So there's a big reduction in the number of landfill sites that operated in Scotland at that time. Now we're down to a scenario where I was trying to count them up the other day. We've probably only got 8 or 9 landfill sites that are currently live in Scotland at the moment, and potentially we're going to run into an issue. So in the past, the big thing when you were running a landfill site was making sure you had void space for the future. Because if you filled so the way most landfill sites work is they work cell by cell. So you fill a cell and then you start restoring it, but then at the same time you're filling the next cell. So you're always developing a cell ahead of yourself. Now, what's happened recently is because the tonnages going into landfill are reducing, companies are less and less inclined to build their new cell. And you're probably talking, for any landfill operator, you're probably talking 2 or 3 months' work to build a cell. It's generally work you can only do in the summer. So potentially we've got a situation where, landfills, although they've got a licence, may not have a cell ready to accept waste. And potentially we'll run out of landfill space.
But I suppose the question is, do we need landfill? And, that's a rhetorical question, Alasdair, at the moment. But we've got our biodegradable ban coming in quite soon. So that's going to take a lot of waste out of landfill again. But that is really just about, a lot of that is about household waste, isn't it? We've still got masses of industrial waste that still need to go somewhere. So the likelihood of us needing landfill still is pretty high.
Oh, there's certainly waste types that the only disposal route is landfill. The biodegradable landfill ban that's coming in Scotland is only for household and commercial waste. So any construction demolition type waste that needs to go to landfill, it still would do. But I think the challenge looming is the tonnage going to these sites will be less and less. And potentially you've got sites that are maybe operating viably at the moment, but are they going to be able to operate next year with only half the tonnage? And if a few of them just make the decision to close, then you're probably talking there's a problem. And what it will mean is people that have to dispose of waste are going to have to travel much, much further. And you already see that with, particularly the Highlands of Scotland. Your nearest landfill site's down in the Central Belt or across to Aberdeen, which for most of them is a 3 or 4 hour journey.
Yeah, it's a long way, isn't it?
It's certainly not complying with the proximity principle about trying to manage waste as close as where it's produced.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like we was listening to something from the about the Western Isles the other week, and they were saying, well, when the biodegradable ban comes in, we have landfills on the island, but we can't do that. So the nearest place is Aberdeen, which is like 7.5 hours or whatever away, and that's just madness. So,
It does seem madness. I was going to say one of the one of the big success stories of landfill is this fact that we can generate electricity from sites. And up till fairly recently, landfill was actually the biggest producer of renewable energy in the country. And there's still a very active industry of capturing the methane gas, putting it through generators and generating electricity. And that's still ongoing. There's a lot of expertise in the country about how to do that. But that was one of the big successes. It's not all bad. In terms of landfill, my view is if you build your site right and you collect and manage your leachate and you collect and manage your landfill gas, and then you deal with the day-to-day issues, mud in the road, the wind-blown litter, all that sort of stuff, it's not by any means the worst thing imaginable.
No.
Because we are going to produce waste. The one I'll always keep going on and on about is in the developing world, if the choice is chuck it at the side of the road and put a match to it, or chuck it at the side of the road and don't do anything to it, and let it wash into the rivers, or have a landfill, then, 100 times out of 100 have the landfill site. Because at least if you've got it there, you can start managing it and developing it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to be opening up landfills to mine them soon, Jane, aren't you? You're going to go in back and then get the precious metals out of them at some point.
Absolutely. Well, I was involved in a project, and it must have been early 1990s, and we were looking at the potential for mining landfill at that point and how you'd mine it, what you could take out of it, and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, it never got anywhere. But the amount of waste that is in those landfill sites, the amount of metals, precious metals, critical metals, all sorts of stuff that is in that landfill site that you can actually extract. At some point, there's not enough, to some extent, there's not enough natural resources to go around for all of the things we want, not necessarily need, but all of the things we want. So at some point, getting them back out of a landfill site may be economic, whether or not, your landfill site in the middle of your housing estate and somebody's in there digging it up will be the best thing. But, you might need to put a big thing around it and, give everybody pegs for their noses. But again, that's kind of the thing that could be the future.
Well, there's certainly a school of thought at the moment that we should, while we've chatted a few times in the podcast about the issues with plastic recycling and lack of capacity in the sector and the financial viability, there is certainly a school of thought that thinks that we should be landfilling plastic with a view to a later date pulling it out of the ground and actually, recovering that plastic properly. And that's more environmentally sustainable than chucking it in an incinerator that we're doing at the moment.
It's more of a storage than anything else, than a final disposal.
Yep. I remember vividly, we're doing a bit of landfill. We need to get some landfill stories in here. So I remember vividly being asked to, I can't remember why I was asked to, I had to do, so the company I worked for had 3 or 4 legacy sites. So they had sites that they did environmental monitoring at, and at the time it was the council, it was the regulator. But then they had 3 or 4 legacy sites which were even older. And this one particular site, a developer was interested in purchasing it. So I was sent out to do some landfill gas monitoring. There was no infrastructure in place, so it was as simple as a bit of reinforcing rod and a big hammer. And I would hammer that into the ground and create a little hole, and then I would stick my gas meter down it. And I was able to get 80% methane in the ground right beside this 20-metre high tree. And I never did work out how this tree was surviving, growing on the top of this landfill site. And then the next bit was we then had to do trial pits, and the machine operated on these trial pits, and we actually dug out a newspaper, and you could actually read this newspaper that was 40 years old, and it had not degraded a single bit. So it's actually, you think West Coast of Scotland, wet and all the rest, that this would be sopping in a mush, and it was certainly not.
I remember going to I've got a landfill story, going to a landfill site, again, it was probably late 90s, and I'd gone for a site visit with a number of people, and it was in the northwest of England, and we were standing on this site, and this was before they'd stopped banning liquids into landfill sites, and the guy was telling us how the Guinness truck came along and they dug a little hole and they put all the Guinness into it and then, covered it up again. And the guy with me was like, I can't believe there's Guinness underneath where I'm standing. There's Guinness. Yeah. So he was quite upset about how Guinness was disposed of in those days. But
it was always quite disappointing when you had
Yeah.
the contract to dispose of these things. It was always beer or something. You had to crush them all and so on.
yeah,
The other ones I remember is having fires on the site. Probably nowhere near as regular as it is now with battery fires and so on. But when you did have a fire, it was always an interesting experience because it was generally not fueled in actual waste. It was fueled by the methane gas as well. So that made it interesting to pull out. And then I was looking for bodies in the landfill as well.
lovely.
We used to always get the other one you got was people trying to do. I never realised it was scams. People trying to do insurance scams. So we'd come up running up to site and claiming their wife had thrown out a handbag with lots of money or lots of jewellery, and 9 times out of 10 it was a scam.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They used to make up this big story of what happened, and then sometimes you would actually find their waste or their suitcase for them or whatever, and there was obviously nothing in it, but
Yeah, there's always tales, aren't there?
there's certainly in landfill anyway. Certainly
Yeah.
in landfill, there's always a tale to be told. A fascinating industry, but I think part of the problem now is a lot of the expertise has moved away from landfill, and I think there is still a requirement for that expertise, but it's an interesting world in terms of operating a landfill site at the moment, I think. And I think the reality is there'll be fewer and fewer sites, so people will be having to travel further and further to get to these sites. So yeah. Anyway, what else about landfill? What do the public not understand about landfill, Jane? And what's your takeaway that you think the public never got?
I think all they got is a big hole in the ground with flies. I think that's always been the one, isn't it? Flies. If you've got smells and flies, that's, no matter where you go, people don't like smell of flies. So I think that's where the public don't like them. A lot of trucks going up and down. Because there's always, you've always had your RCVs, your big bin lorries heading off up to the landfill. You've always got the litter everywhere. So I think that's always been part of it. And I think everybody thinks the worst, don't they? You may have the most amazing landfill site ever, and then one day the wind picks up and you get all this litter, and then that's what everybody remembers it for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I used to rant to them about housekeeping all the time. If you make it look good, if you make it look like a rubbish dump, it'll be a rubbish dump. And there's ways you can make it look a lot better. It was always the one that I always found really challenging to deal with was odour from landfill site. If you weren't managing your landfill gas properly, it was really challenging. And sometimes you couldn't do that because you were still actively tipping in an area. So there was a real jigsaw going on. But I think everybody imagines like waste really smells. And if you're beside a bin lorry that's just tipped out, it doesn't actually change. It's not that odorous. Another thing people always used to say, what about the rats? What about the rats? You never saw a rat. On a well-run site, you never saw a rat.
Yeah.
I was going to say the only time we saw rats is when the locals to Ayrshire may remember the Butlins holiday camp just south of Ayr. All the old prefab buildings were demolished, and we got hundreds and thousands, well, maybe not hundreds of thousands of tons. We got tons and tons of waste from Butlins, and the rats were literally jumping out the trucks before the waste got tipped out.
Oh, lovely.
And ever after that, we had a rat problem at the site. But that's what people were living at the holiday park.
Oh my goodness. I tell you what though, a lot of the landfills you go to now that have been restored or they've got trees on, you wouldn't recognise them, because I went up to one the other day and there was bunny rabbits hopping around, there was deers running around, and they are such a haven for wildlife now as well. They were always they're always big. There's a lot of, landfills tend to be quite big. So you restored part of it and you kept going with the other, and that's when you got your deer and your bunny rabbits and all those other wildlife.
There's quite a few of them now, sites of special scientific interest. The one at Kinneil Kerse at Grangemouth. It's a site of special scientific interest for the bird life and so on. They do restore well. The challenge you've got with landfill, was something we've not talked about, is we used to allow for at least 30% settlement. So if you put 30 metres of waste in a hole, we're expecting that to settle by 10 metres. And that's a lot to deal with if you're trying to put any sort of infrastructure, whether it's paths or roads and so on. So they will continue to settle for a long, long time, which is why you need to maintain them. There we go. So that's us finished our little mini series on waste hierarchy. If you've not listened to the previous ones, we did a reduce, a reuse, a recycle, recovery, and finally a landfill disposal.
Yep, done them all. So, Alasdair, is there any rants for today? Have you got any suitable ones? I'm sure you have.
I've been saving this one, Jane. I've been saving this one up.
Okay.
So, as you know, I was flying abroad recently to the Pyrenees to run around the mountains for a week or so, and I travelled through Edinburgh Airport.
Okay.
And I was most impressed by Edinburgh Airport with their 6 fountains after duty free for filling up your water bottle. So that was all good and positive. And then as I was walking through the terminal, I noticed the bin for the coffee cups. So it was only for coffee cups.
Okay.
So when I looked in the bin, guess what was in the bin, Jane?
Everything but coffee cups?
There was the odd coffee cup, but there was also all sorts of other crap.
Oh, no.
But then it got worse.
Oh,
It got worse than that. I then went further along the airport and I found a bin that had 2 compartments to it. So it was residual waste and coffee cups.
Okay.
And guess what was in that bin?
I would say a mixture of coffee cups and everything else. I bet you couldn't tell which was which.
Well, no, it was actually, although the top of the bin was split into coffee cups and residual waste, inside the bin, it was just one plastic bag.
Oh, no.
So it was all being
Oh,
collected
dear.
as residual waste, which I just think is just, if we're trying to get the public to do things, we need to be honest about it. You know, if it's all just going to go as residual waste, what's the point in putting a separate bin for a coffee cup?
Do you
Or
think there
showing
was
it
a
separately?
mistake, though? Do you think somebody had put one bag in instead
I
of 2?
actually don't think. I don't.
Oh, no.
No, because I looked at another one. So the ones that were genuinely just a single bin for coffee cups were, by the looks of it, genuinely for coffee cups. But it looked like the doubled ones, if you like, that were joined together. It was just one plastic bag in it, which was really depressing.
So the kind of idea there was that they tried to separate the coffee cups, but not got it right all the time.
Are they trying, or are they just trying to give the impression they're trying?
So do you think the coffee cups that were separated were treated separately? Do you think? Or do you think they just went into the residual waste
I
at the
don't know.
end?
Don't know. We need to find somebody at Edinburgh Airport to tell us.
Is there actually a recycling place for coffee cups?
Well, there's the national cup recycling scheme, which has opened up this competition, which actually only closes on the 31st of October. And this is one, we've talked about this before. So this is funded by Costa, McDonald's, Pret a Manger, Cafe Nero, and so on. And they're putting into it. But when I looked at this, it's something like, so we're producing estimated 3.2 billion cups every year, but we're actually only recycling 233 million of them. But you actually work out the cost of, it works out 32,000 tons of coffee cups would dispose of the UK. That and disposal cost alone is 5.12 million.
Wow.
You know, that's what's costing councils and all the rest for actually emptying this stuff. So they're only actually, you know, contributing something like, I think it worked out as 0.01% of their annual profits. They're contributing to actually in this 45k fund. So they've put up 45,000, but it's costing councils 5.2 million. So maybe it's not got it right someplace. The other thing I was going to say about the coffee cups, I think it's just down to descriptions. So if you buy a sort of iced drink at a coffee place, you tend to get in a plastic tumbler. So there were quite a few of these in the bin. So people are thinking, well, I bought at the coffee shop there for this thing, but that's a totally different material. And I suppose it's how do you get that complexity across to the public? If they can't work out what a coffee cup is, it's really hard in these public spaces to work out. I did try and take some videos, but I didn't want to be seen as some dodgy geezer taking videos of bins in Edinburgh Airport. So I do need to produce my wee TikToks. I've got some video content I'm going to do a wee TikTok video on about it. But I don't know. It just struck me a bit. One, it was a bit depressing that we can't. If a bin says coffee cups, you still get other things in it. That was depressing. And then it was really depressing when I saw the two bins were actually joined together. So they're obviously not dealing with them as coffee cups. If it's two separate bins and they were genuinely trying to extract the coffee cups, I would say, well done, fair play to you.
Yes.
But that did not look like what they were doing. So
well,
a little bit misleading.
I did use a first time I've used one of those borrow my cups this weekend, because normally I would take my own cup and get it filled up, but I didn't have it because we were at the Transport Museum in Glasgow, and they had one of these borrow my cup things. So I thought, right, I'm gonna. I even took a photo of it.
You're gonna do it
for me and my borrow my cup.
Well done.
Yeah, that's what I was impressed with myself.
So as I keep telling everybody, every person in the UK uses a cup once, reuses a cup once. That's 69 million cups less used. We change adds up to big numbers, Jane.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I think that's us done. So next week we are going to start a new series. So we've done the waste hierarchy. So that's if you like the background, we're going to start a new series on waste journeys, where we will try and look at individual waste types and follow them through the process and talk about, what happens, what doesn't happen, what people think happens, and some of the issues in each of the individual sectors. So listen out for the next episode.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. See you again next Thursday at 4 p.m. Don't forget to follow, share with friends, and send us your feedback at hello@rubbishtalk.co.uk.